Safety and Justice Affairs Committee. This is February 1st, the Tuesday before the Wednesday-Thursday storm. Roll call, please.
Calling the roll, Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Ms. Conwell. Ms. Conwell is absent at the moment. Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. You do not have a quorum.
Thank you. Public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one is signed in. And also I'd like the record to reflect that council members Miller and Turner are in attendance.
Welcome, Ms. Turner and Mr. Miller. We'll hold the approval of the minutes. There are no matters before the committee. However, we're going to have an update on the Cuyahoga County Corrections Center project. That was basically heard in the steering committee meeting of last week, and infamously noted at the last council meeting by a citizen, Mr. Applebaum, who is the council and the executives of the county's rep, is going to give us an overview as to where we're at regarding that meeting and any updates that we can get from Mr. Dever. And Ms. Baker is also in attendance.
Is this on? Okay. Thank you, Councilman. What I'm going to do, I'm sure you can hear me okay through my mask here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring everyone up to date with where we are. And I believe that Councilman Gallagher may have given you a copy of the presentation that was made at the steering committee. It has a lot of information in it and graphics about design. I'm not going to go through the design presentation. I have a couple slides just to talk about that. The presentation I'm about to make is slides that were basically taken from that presentation with the exception of all the design slides. There's maybe 20 or 30 design slides there that I'm not going to go through. So the agenda for what I want to talk through with you is right here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the project schedule and status and where we are on what's referred to as program confirmation, where we are in the design process without actually walking through a lot of the design. We're going to talk a little bit about the next step in the process, the recommendations that were made regarding the design builder. We're going to walk you through the county's procurement process. I know there was some statements made which are dramatically incorrect about how the county's procurement process worked. It was an open book public process. We'll take you through it, through those steps. Nicole English is here, good, who will also walk through a few slides about that process. I will tell you a little bit about the party that is now under consideration to serve the role of design builder, which is a Gilbane-Hunt joint venture. And I'll walk you through what was presented so far to the steering committee, including their recommendation. Keep in mind that that still has to go through a county process. We still have to finalize a proposed contract with Gilbane-Hunt. That then has to go through the procurement process here and acceptance. I'm not getting ahead of that process. I'm just going to take you up to speed with where we were in front of the steering committee and take you that far. And then I'm just going to make a few comments about the site selection process. We're not going to get into the detail that would be in a executive session, but I'm going to tell you publicly just where that process is, the same information I gave to the steering committee.
Right. And before we start, to council members, last week I had delivered to you the presentation from the steering committee meeting itself, which details everything that Jeff's going to go over today. And outlines where hopefully we're going to be going into the future, how we got to where we got to today. Before we start, Mr. Applebaum, as you're well aware, Mr. Norm Edwards came in here, and when you are in this council chambers, as since the Ken Mills trial, anything you say at that podium is basically under oath. So taking Mr. Norm Edwards' comments as oath, I've turned that transcript over to the Inspector General for review. He's accused you directly of steering contracts, of intimidation, among other things. He's hit the trifecta of scandalous behavior, if true, not scandalous behavior. And we're going to take it seriously as if it's true until proved the other way. Do you have any comment regarding his attacks upon you personally, your company, and the process?
My only comment would be that those statements are not true. I'm not going to speculate as to why they were made. It is not the first time that Mr. Edwards has done this sort of thing. He made accusations about the contractor and contracts involved on the hotel project. He did it on the, I believe, on the convention center project. So this has happened before. I'm going to let the facts speak for themselves. Certainly welcome the Inspector General's investigation. Once again, it would have been impossible to do the things Mr. Edwards talks about given the nature of the public process that was involved. So I would strenuously deny any of those allegations, but let the facts speak for themselves. I'll just leave it at that.
Good enough. Thank you.
So let me start out. This is a slide that just talks about where we are in the project, the process flow. And this may be familiar. I've used a similar slide before, but just to tell you where we are in the process, as you all know, we started up the process after an MOU was signed that set up the steering committee as a kind of a parallel process with what the county itself would do. We have gone, we've selected our programmer, which was DLR. We spent a couple of years interrupted by COVID, working on programming and project definition for both the jail and the courts. Did that pretty much in parallel, creating space standards, a space program. There came a point in time, basically in March of last year, when we had, by March of last year, when we had completed a jail, the preliminary jail program. The decision had been made by the steering committee to have a standalone jail on a site outside of the downtown core. We talked about, and you will all recall this, talked about the size of the jail, talked about various aspects of that. At that point in time, the discussion of what to do with the rest of the components of the Justice Center was basically put on hold. But in essence, the decision was made to have the standalone jail and then either continue to think about renovation of the existing courts or a build new project. What's in red here are two steps that need to be done, are not yet completed. If you proceed on the courts, one would be a city-county negotiation, and the other is a funding plan, making sure there's a plan to fund any component of this project. At the commencement of that process, we had a preliminary program for the jail. We started the site selection process. We also then confirmed the project delivery, decided that we would be using a design-build, bridging design-build project delivery system, similar to what we did for the hotel and the convention center and what the county has been very successful implementing. At that point in time, we selected the criteria architect, which is the HOK team, and they started to do two things. Number one, confirming the program. There's a program that had been prepared. Their job is to confirm it and to test it and to see if there's any modifications, particularly in light of post-COVID activities, because COVID did throw a bit of a curveball into all this. And then they also started what's known as schematic design. And I'm going to come back to a little bit more on the schedule in a little bit on this. But the next steps, finalize the confirmation of the program, which we're pretty close to doing, and then finalizing the site, because you can only design so much until you know the exact site that you're designing on. You can start schematic design, but you cannot complete schematic design without knowing your specific site. So there were a lot of critical issues under discussion. I'm not going to go through them, but some of them had to do with what to do with the sheriff's administration. The decision was made to basically combine the facilities and not have a standalone sheriff's administration. A lot of shared space opportunities, more efficiency with movement, reduction in staffing positions. And then there's a whole series of other things that were considered in this process, everything from parking to the bed types, how to specialize the intake and assessment. And we also had site visits. Your staff went out and visited a couple critical sites. We have a few more site visits planned, which really informed the process. The space program, and we've talked about this the last time I was here. Where do we stand on the program? And you'll recall that right now what is happening is the jail population is around in the vicinity of 1,600, a little bit more, a little bit less. Obviously, we've talked through all of the population reduction methods, and I'm not going to repeat them here, but you know all the steps, diversion, central booking. You've had hearings to talk about these things. We still want to drive that number down, but for planning purposes right now, we have devised a program that really anticipates about 1,904 beds, because what you do is you take that 1,600 or so, you divide it by 0.85, which is the constant you need to use, because obviously everybody doesn't neatly fit into categories. Even if you had 1,600 people, you'd need more beds because you don't fill every component, male, female, all the specialty groups that you see here. But that's basically programmatically what we're working out right now, about 1,904. That is adjustable. It could go up, it could go down, and the Corps would still support up to 2,400 beds, but that's the program we're working on. And this just shows some of the housing unit breakdown in the various components of male and female beds and all these special categories. And you can study this at your convenience, but this is basically, this is based on a long, involved process of talking through, looking at populations, looking at special needs, and then for every one of these classifications, the team has started to organize and design the housing units, working closely with your jail administrator, sheriff, and others. And if you take a look at the presentation that Councilman Gallagher passed out, you'll see the various types of housing units and how they would be organized. I just thought I'd put a couple of these, and once again, these are just early renderings. And by the way, the program does not put people in jail dress, so there's no program that does that. So these people are not dressed out the way you'd expect. But this just gives you an example of what one of these housing units typically might look like. You see the recreation area in the back, and of course this is the concept of having direct supervision where you can observe everybody in different ways and observe them in the various spaces. And there's different rooms that are configured that are visitation rooms, medical rooms, all around a central facility. Just another type of a view of what these kinds of spaces might look like. And I'm not here to make a design presentation. So we'll let the architects come back and do that. But if you take a look at the package, you'll see quite a bit more information. I'm just showing these as examples of the kind of progress which is being made in thinking through the design of the project. And these are just some views. Another way to think about the process that we're working through in the milestone dates. The top line, of course, this was designed for the steering committee. So you see the steering committee's actions from the time they were formed, when the initial assessment was completed, and then they've made a series of determinations throughout the process, including determinations they just made at this last meeting. In terms of how the project is delivered, that's in light blue. You see when the programmer was selected, when we confirmed the project delivery system, when the criteria architect was selected, and now it's time to select the design builder. In terms of programming and design milestones, we get done for the CCCC, for the corrections facility with the initial program. When that gets done, when we commence schematic design, when we now are adjusting and confirming the program, and other activities, a couple key ones, commencing all those interim justice program improvements, and that's everything from diversion to interim central booking, and then also commencing the site selection process in green. Just once again, another way to look at the different flows on the project in a simplified fashion. One of the things that's important here to understand in this process is you see the commencement of schematic design. We can do about 30% of schematic design before we know the specific site. So you can design all those spaces that you saw, housing units, but you have to know your specific site to figure out how it's stacked, how it's laid out, how linear the building needs to be, whether it could be a more regular shaped building. So to some degree, the height, because it could be constrained, how parking works. So what this graphic shows is we can commence schematic design, but at a point in time, we have to have our site selection completed before we can complete schematic design. And there's some dates in here, they may or may not be realistic, but at a point in time, this project, the critical path of the project moving forward is knowing what our site is. And if that is delayed, the whole process is delayed. So I just want you to understand that's a critical element to getting the project done. Part of getting it done is also getting the design builder on board. We also want the design builder's assistance in doing some cost estimation, doing some review and analysis to help us with the site, and to be involved with constructability review and cost review as we go through schematic design. So getting the design builder on board is also a critical element, the difference being we can control the timing of getting the design builder on board. Getting the site taken care of is a more complex and difficult issue that we have to work through. But we are working through it, obviously. So let me talk about the recommendation for the design builder. And just as a reminder, the graphic on the right shows you how the project is structured. The owner, or the county, is the owner. We retain the programmer. We've retained the criteria architect. But everything in that green circle is the design builder's responsibility. The design builder itself is the point for design and construction of the project. The design builder hires the architect of record that ultimately will intercept the design development done by the criteria architect and complete all of the drawings and take that responsibility. And then a myriad of subcontractors will then be under contract with the design builder. Keep in mind that all the design builders, this is all done in an open book process. So the design builders are selected based on competitive bidding or competitive proposals that are observed by the county, selected on a best value basis. So that is all monitored, that's all competitive, and that's where really all of the major work is done. This is an open book process, not a closed process. It's open to the world, it's open to the public to see. Just as, by the way, the selection of the design builder is an open process, open for the public to see. Remember of what the role of the design builder is, holds the contracts with the architect, completes the design, performs all these pre-construction services we need now, provides an open book guaranteed maximum price based on the DD documents, competitively bids and prices all subcontractor work, is required to implement a robust inclusion plan, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and completes all the work based upon a guaranteed price and guaranteed schedule. So that's the role that we're looking at. So at this point in time, I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to ask Nicole to come forward and just describe the process, the public process that was used. And Nicole, it's this button right here to advance the slides.
Thank you. Nicole English from Public Works. So Public Works handled the procurement of the design builder through the Department of Purchasing. And so we followed our typical process. Design build is described in the county code, and it's a two-step process. So the first thing you do is put out an RFQ, which is asking for qualifications. That was issued on September 21st, 2021. Really describes all the services that you're asking for, and then tells the contractor what they need to submit. The RFQ is just qualification, so there's no pricing component at the first stage. And so as part of that, we did a pre-bid conference on September 30th, where vendors called in. We explained what was going on the project, when things were due, how to submit, those kind of things. The qualifications were due on November 18th, 2021, which is longer than is required. So it's typically just a 30-day minimum is what we use. It used to be 2 weeks and a day, and now it's been out longer to 30 days per the executive order. So this was even out longer to try to make sure that we had all the competition out there and get this in everybody's hands that could possibly be interested in submitting. And so as part of the RFQ, though, we did give them the draft of the RFP so they would know on that second step what they were going to need to submit. So in preparing for the RFQ submittal, they already knew what was going to be coming on the RFP. We did receive one submittal on the RFQ, and then the RFP was issued on December 6th to that one vendor. The committee did meet in between there, so the selection committee that's listed on the left consisted of some county folks, also Judge Early. We had extended invitations to anyone on the Justice Center Steering Committee that would have been interested in partaking, and the only ones that did decide they wanted to be part of it was Clerk Byrd and Judge Early. And then the rest are, and the sheriff, sorry, is also on the steering committee. And then the rest are county administrative folks. So we evaluated the RFQ and said what they submitted to the qualifications was sufficient, and we would issue them the RFP. That was done on December 6th. Their proposal was due on December 14th, which now includes some more specific qualifications, but then also the initial pricing information. So general conditions, the things that they can price up front. So it's not a bid like you would normally get on, say, a roadway project, because it's design build. So they don't exactly know what they're bidding on yet, but they can give us pricing on their upfront costs. So their general conditions, how much design is going to cost, those few things. So there is some pricing components that we can evaluate. So the design build team was interviewed on December 16th through Zoom, actually, because this is when COVID started spiking again. And so we did it virtually. And then we worked with the team, the selection committee team, to score the RFP. So this is the categories. On the left, you'll see that we scored. Those are published in the RFQ and the RFP, so they know what they're getting scored on. The maximum points are listed there. The Gilbane Hunt team, which is the proposal that we got, those are the points that we awarded them per the committee's recommendations. So as you'll see, 20 is the highest in most of the categories. We typically don't give anybody perfect. We're a little bit hard graders just in general. And so we gave them pretty good scores based on what they proposed. And then you'll see that their pricing proposal, they did get on the quantitative 5 out of 10, because we did feel there was some room to negotiate there, that they didn't necessarily give us their best pricing. And so as part of the negotiation process, we can do that, negotiating both their scope, the contract, and their fee that they're charging us for that work. So they received 88 out of 115 points. And they're calling themselves the Cuyahoga County Justice Partners, but the two main firms that are making up the joint venture are Gilbane and Hunt. This is just some pieces out of their proposal. The core team that they've given us up to that top left are representatives from several of the firms that are making up their team. It is a large team. They've included a slew of local folks. So as part of that diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that's on the lower left-hand side, you'll see some familiar faces, I would think, to you. So these are members of, prominent firms in town, local businesses that are going to be participating in the project. The right side of the slide is just kind of their high level, why choose us? So this was just a way to give you kind of a quick snapshot of their qualifications and why we think that they are the right team to do this job. So Jeff, I think you have a couple more slides here. If there's any questions about selection process, that really comes out of Public Works, and we kind of handled that, so that's why I did these slides. Jeff has a little bit more detail on the proposal, the team, and what they offer.
And if you'd touch on why just one ended up bidding.
Yeah. You could talk through, I mean, we also did outreach, everything that we could, published it. We've been talking to people, even though it went out on that September date. We have been talking to contractors and putting information out really since we hired HOK as the criteria architect. So the knowledge has been out there. Again, even though it was out about 2 months officially on the street, I mean, we've been, talking to we through the project team have been talking to anyone who could possibly be interested, could do the work, local firms. So don't think that it was only those couple months. We hired HOK, last year early on. So it's been going on for a while, but I'll let Jeff get into some more detail.
We've been aware of this issue. It's very difficult, by the way, and frankly, we're fortunate to have the team we have that proposed on the project because there are limited builders in the country capable of building major projects like this. New York actually had an issue finding their builders, and that was, they're building their first jail there, which is less than half the size of our jail, has a $1.8 billion budget, less than half the size of our jail. Part of that's New York pricing, but it's difficult in this market. In this particular case, keep in mind what we have to find. We have to have a builder that, number one, has the qualifications and the resume and the capability of building a major jail facility. Number two, they have to be capable of bonding the project. They have to issue a performance and payment bond that is going to be several $100 million. Well north of 300, maybe approaching $400 million bond. They have to have some experience or capability to build in Ohio. You obviously need someone who has some familiarity with the local contracting committee or joint ventures. Typically, on projects like this, there are 4 major builders who have bonding. And by the way, if you just looked at the regional players who are just in this region and work in this region, and we have a lot of fine contractors here, and you know their names, whether it's the Higleys, the Donleys, Independence, Panzica. There's a whole list of them. These individuals, these players, in and of themselves, are not large enough to bond a project like this. They have to work with somebody else, and most of them don't have any jail experience at all. And they still may, by the way, end up bidding for portions of the work. Historically, there's actually only been 4 major players that have come in and done these major community impact projects. And I'll tell you their names. They are Turner Construction Company that did our Hilton Hotel and our convention center. Whiting Turner, which has also done work for the county. Gilbane and Hunt. Those are the 4. And if you take most of the community impact projects here in town, stadiums, arenas, major big projects, those are the 4 players. In this particular case, 2 of the 4 were not available. Turner Construction Company made, and this is one of the issues in the industry, they made the decision at the national level, at the CEO level, that they will no longer build jails. Why they've made that decision, and of course we tried to get them to reconsider that decision, but nowhere in the country is Turner any longer building any jails. This was not what their local Cleveland team wanted. It's not even what their Ohio team wanted. They wanted to go after this project, but at the national level, they are no longer in that business, and that was a big blow for Cleveland because they're one of the biggest builders of projects here in Cleveland. Whiting Turner, while they will eventually hopefully propose if we have a courthouse project, they simply made the decision that they did not have the expertise and they did not have what it took, in their view, to be successful doing a jail project. Gilbane and Hunt decided that in order to really serve this project properly with a lot of competing things, they decided to joint venture and bring a lot of other players into their team. We tried to talk to local players about seeing if they wouldn't combine with some out-of-town players, and I could give you the laundry list of who we talked to. But there's simply no one else who, looking at this project, looking at Cleveland, looking at the unique issues, looking at what they would have to do, felt they could be successful. And so we had the single proposal from Gilbane Hunt. Now here's the good news about this. If this had been a lump sum proposal later on, you could never look behind it. You could never understand if the lack of competition impacted you. Here we know exactly what is going on because we have the components, and you've heard me go through this. We have it priced. We know their fee, we know their staff, and we know every aspect. And we've told them that even though they are the sole bidder, we're still not going to accept their proposal unless they are competitive. And what we have done is we have taken those key components, we have looked at their pricing, we have counter-proposed, and we are negotiating to get a level of pricing on those elements that you price right now that is market rate based on other comparable projects throughout the country. And we think we're being successful in getting to that point right now. Frankly, they know they're under the microscope as well, and they have been collaborative and cooperative in getting there. They're not looking to unfairly take advantage of the situation. They're looking to be a good community partner. And keep in mind that most of the pricing here, almost 90-some% of it is still based on subcontractor bidding. And those smaller components, those can be bid out and will be bid out, and that will be competitive from a pricing point of view. Just to give you an idea of the commitment, so this is a little bit about this team. And the interesting thing about this team is 48%, and this is a team at the management level that consists of a lot of other players. Because keep in mind, they have architects, engineers, and others, not subcontractors, but management firms. And the team that is proposed to us, actually 48% of it consists of SBEs, MBEs, or WBEs. And there's no double counting here. If you are an MBE, you're not also an SBE. It's one or the other. So 48%, this is about as high a percentage as you'll ever see of a management team. And this, it's one thing to go out and subcontract and, get your cast of characters at subcontract. This is at the management level, at the design level. Over 20% SBE, about 20% MBE, and 8.68% WBE. Local, big commitment to DEI because this is what we told them would be required for this project. This is what we told them in the RFQ would be needed. So these are very high percentages. A little bit about how they're set up. You have Gilbane Hunt, which is the joint venture at the core of the CM. They have two MBEs who participate in those functions, Ozan and TMG. There's also construction management staff augmentation, which are representative of MBE, WBE firms. The architect of record is a local architect who is the key architect, Bowen, supported by a national architect, HDR, with great jail experience, and then a whole cast of engineers to take on and architects to take on special tasks. So the commitment to DEI, the commitment to local, the commitment to minority is extremely strong here. You can see just a little bit about their experience, over $8.8 billion of experience in Cuyahoga County. The average number of years that these firms collectively have done business in Cuyahoga County is over 50 years. And if you take these firms and just the number of staff that are not necessarily working on the project, but are employed and live in Cuyahoga County, it's over 450. That's pretty impressive. They also have some very important direct experience. The most recent jail projects that are close to us are Franklin County and Gilbane was the construction manager on Franklin County, along with HDR, which is part of their design team for this project, and then Marion County, where Hunt was the construction manager on that facility, which is just now in the process of being completed. So regional experience, we have the two major players, and also their design, the key design members of those teams are also on our team. So we have really collected the best and most experienced for this project. Once again, DEI, there you see the county goals and voluntary workforce goals. They have come forward with a robust plan that we'll talk more about in another session as to how they're going to make a real difference. There's actually some detail here. There is we challenge them to find a group of players to play roles that have not been played before. A lot of this has to do with what's called design assist contracting, where minorities and female firms have not typically played a large role. We're challenging them to open those new doors for those roles. And I think we'll have a whole presentation on that at a future date. And this is part of that process of targeting. We've actually had them lay out the different aspects of the project and where they think they can maximize SBE, MBE, and WB participants. So they've really thought through the plan very well. And they do this through, these are the executive orders that you guys have had, and then the disparity study. And they've thought through, you start with your goals, you come with your communication strategy, you go out and you figure out how best to select these folks, and then responsiveness by monitoring is part of that plan. And they have talked us through their playbook to do that, their community outreach program, their tracking program, which will all be something to talk about in the future. In terms of workforce itself, we know we're going to have over 1 million man hours on this job. And once again, they have laid out a plan, category by category by category, as to where they think they can get minority, female, and county residents to participate on the project. A well thought out plan demonstrating with details as to how they think this can be accomplished. So I'm going to make one more comment before I move on. And this is in regard to some of the comments you heard. It would be, the idea that anyone was steered away from this project is preposterous. And I will use the word preposterous. The idea here was to try to maximize and make sure we had a good player. I wasn't even on the selection committee, just to be clear. I stayed off the selection committee. The goal here is to, maximize your players. I believe that Mr. Edwards said he talked to 30 contractors who decided not to propose on this project. I would challenge you to get the name of one who says that happened and find out how they were steered away. There is no reason to steer anybody away. You would want anybody who would be involved to try to be involved in terms of someone qualified to do the project, someone who could bond the job, someone who has the size. There aren't 30 contractors who could have even done that. So I don't know where that is coming from, but the whole time through, I worked hand in hand with your procurement department, with Mike Dever, with Nicole. So I have to tell you, if I'm guilty of a conspiracy, so are they. And there's just no way. How do you like that? How'd you like that? There's no way that anything like that could have occurred, or there's just no reason for it to occur. No way it could have occurred. So I don't know what else to say about that, and I'll just leave that alone. Ultimately, all this information was presented to the steering committee, and by a 12-0 vote, they voted to approve. Once again, it's their recommendation. They approve it. Now it has to go through the county process. But they have gone through their part of it, approving of the design builder. Of course, subject to the ability to negotiate and finalize an acceptable agreement and provided that such agreement contains commercially reasonable terms, including a robust plan for diversity and inclusion, which is why I kind of showed you a little bit about where that is going. I have one more thing I want to talk about on site selection. I don't know if you want to ask any questions about that right now, or just want me to finish up here.
Why don't you just finish, and then we can ask any questions necessary.
So what I'm going to do right now, and obviously I'm not going to, in a public forum, talk about anything which has not yet been publicly disclosed, or anything that has only been in an executive session. But I wanted to just walk through, for everyone's benefit, and I shared this with the committee and publicly, the steps which have been taken to remind everybody where we are in the site selection process. So I'm just going to go through these steps so everyone understands where we're at on this. So back in the fall of 2020, we knew that we wanted to explore building a new jail on a site outside of the downtown Cleveland core. So the first step was to come up with criteria. What criteria would you use? So at that time, our experts, based on what had been done and what's common in other projects, created a list of potential criteria. This is just the first page of a multi-page document, but it talked about what are the important criteria. Access to justice, the ability for people to get there and get there conveniently and park, whether it's highway access, RTA access, proximity to the courts, proximity to emergency services, a lot of specific things about the site itself. How does it interface with the neighborhood, making sure that we're not, next to schools or in residential areas directly. All the different things that you would think about, the ease of acquisition, the cost of acquisition, geotechnical issues, environmental issues, the list goes on and on. So we created this initial list. It was presented to the steering committee in October of 2020, and we asked for comment on the list. And this was without weighing anything. This is just, is there more criteria we should consider? Is this an important criteria or not? There was agreement at the November 12th steering committee meeting on the criteria, and they then authorized the county basically to initiate the site exploration selection process. That process, once again, your Public Works Department and the county prosecutor's office actually got heavily involved in that process, with contracts under the prosecutor and work being done by Public Works. And the county retained a consultant, a real estate consultant, to try to find sites. And so these sites were assembled based on criteria. There must have been close to 50 sites. And keep in mind, the most critical criteria is you have to have at least 40 acres. And finding a really acceptable site with 40 acres in Cuyahoga County, which is highly developed, is a very difficult task. It's not like someone has 40 acres sitting around waiting for this project in an ideal location. Any location is going to have some compromises. The first executive session to consider the acquisition of property for the Correction Center occurred on February 11th, 2021, and there was a review of these sites at that time. At that point in time, simultaneously or in March, we did some public outreach. We did a presentation for the public on site criteria, and we put out a survey and a poll for the public to comment. What do you think of these criteria? How would you rank them? What's most important to you as a public? What is missing? What comments do you have? We had over 200 people comment. That survey was up for a few weeks. It was advertised. The results of that were reported, and that input was given to those individuals who were looking at sites to try to prioritize sites. And there was a presentation made on those results, a public meeting on March 25th with the results of that information. On June 10th, we had the second executive session to consider acquisition of property for the Correction Center. And it has been publicly disclosed, so I will say here that yes, there were 5 sites that were listed as the best of the bunch. No effort as between those five at the time to really say one is the site because there's still a lot of investigation that had to be done. After that was done, we were notified by the city that one of the sites was not available because the city already had plans for it and had moved ahead with another something they were doing on that site. That left it to 4. At that point in time, that required a lot of due diligence, which we are to this day still moving forward with. From that day to the present, there's been due diligence led by the county prosecutor's office, hiring some consultants, led by Public Works, looking at geotechnical issues associated with these sites, looking at environmental issues associated with these sites, zoning issues that would have to be overcome, acquisition issues, and that is still a work in process. There is no, one site which has been finally identified as the preferred site. The work is still in process to look at these sites. We had a third executive session just at this last steering committee meeting on January 20th, and we provided an update in the third executive session about these sites. Now, there's a parallel process. While we retained the services of a consultant to try to identify sites, there's a parallel process. And we said, just to be sure we haven't missed something, just to be sure that somebody in Cuyahoga County doesn't have, 40 plus acres that they feel that they have some control of or the ability to control, and maybe they would propose their site. So we put out an RFP. We said, here's our criteria. If you have an alternate site, if you think there's something else out there that you have or, in some fashion or can control, present it. The response to that RFP is actually due on February 7th, and we will then see if anything else has popped up. And of course, eventually all this comes back to the county, but the process that the county agreed to with the steering committee in that MOU does have the steering committee involved with the site process and approval. Realistically, while the approvals of the steering committee, at least under the agreement right now, are necessary, they're not sufficient because it still has to come back to the county for everything at the end of the day. It is the county, after all, that pays for all of this and has to pass that legislation. I think the only other thing I would say is we have our next steering committee meeting on February 10. Mr. Gallagher, if you want to announce the location, I'll leave it to you. We have to just confirm the location, but it's on February 10. What we're going to do at that meeting is we're really going to come back and refocus a little bit on the courts. We haven't talked about the courts for a while. We have to come back and talk about where we have left off on the courts and what, really where we are right now in the discussion of everything else in the Justice Center other than the jail. So that's really my prepared presentation. I'll take any questions.
Going forward, all meetings will be in the council chambers and subject to anything that might come up. And everybody obviously will be encouraged to be here because we are in that nuts and bolts bucket. So, questions? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman. Through the chair to Mr. Applebaum, in our last disparity study, how did Gilbane and Hunt fare in the relationship compared to the first disparity study? And the reason I'm asking that, we set, when we first got on board, we set this disparity study. We knew it was a disparity, so we put that forth. In the second disparity study that we had, I don't know, last year or whatever, got COVID brain, so I don't remember the dates anymore, but it kind of came out of that disparity that there was a valid disparity in WBEs, FBs not getting contracts overall. So I'm just asking, and I'm sure Gilbane, I don't know if Hunt did anything, and you don't have to answer this now, but if you can look up that information and get it back to me, how did they fare in that second disparity study that we did. That would determine my response in moving forward with them.
So we'll have to check, Lenora Lockett's group kind of led that charge, so we're familiar with the report and have read it, but I don't know to what level they studied each individual vendor, or it was an overall look at types of work. I know that's kind of how we are taking it. So she did set the goals on this RFQ and RFP based on the results of the disparity study. So they're meeting the goals that she set based on that. But as far as individual companies, I'm not sure what they looked at, how the company did at reaching goals. But I mean, we'd have to consult with Lenora just to get some more specifics on that.
Yeah, if we had several people in this, I probably wouldn't even ask that question. But since we have
right.
a sole source, we need to be, at least I need to be clear on their previous commitment and what they have done in this county and going forward.
Yeah, we do have, right now Gilbane is working on, who's Ozane is on the central booking. So we don't have a current contract with Gilbane on anything, and not in the couple of recent past. So I don't know that there's recent data on what they've done for us. However, we can look at
Yeah, we
their
can look
past
at
products,
overall. Yeah, what they did.
Yep.
And to Mr. Applebaum, you stated that Whiting Turner determined that they weren't, and correct me, I could be wrong, it could be just Turner, that refused, no, it was Whiting Turner that wasn't going to do jails anymore.
That's Turner.
Yeah, that's just Turner. Okay.
Yeah, there's a
So when did they
confusion.
make that determination? Is this public record not to build jails anymore? I would be interested, and I don't know if you would know the specific date that they determined that.
I don't want to speak for Turner, and frankly, this is sort of a sore topic for me because I wanted them very much to propose on this project. Not that I necessarily wanted to get the project, but I did, like anybody else, I would like to have seen multiple proposals. This was, and you may want to talk to them, but this was a decision, I'm told, that came from the CEO. That they, and this was, something that had to do with their younger personnel in the company and just a direction. A comment was made to me that, something like they build hospitals to heal, they build schools to teach, and it was like this idea that, but they don't want to build jails to incarcerate. And of course, the response that we would have is, the whole point of this is to take a jail which is not as humane as we'd like it to be and improve it dramatically. So we think that's an important thing to do. And I will tell you, their local office very much wanted to do this job. Their regional office wanted to do this job. But this was an edict that came down from on high. We even checked and we talked, we took a look throughout the country to make sure, to just check on this. And yes, in fact, they now desist from jail, and they were one of the largest jail builders. But they've now determined not to build jails anywhere in the country, at least right now. So that's just what occurred.
Okay, so, yeah.
Michael Dever, Director of Public Works. Yeah, I actually had a call from the second in command here in the local, Marty Burwinkle, and he notified me last summer. He wanted to come in and let us know, because everyone knew this project's on the horizon and it's moving forward. So there was the interest out there, but he wanted to let us know that this directive or edict from the national office was coming down and that they won't be participating. He didn't want it to blemish their record or their name so that they could participate in future projects also. So I really appreciate him doing so.
Actually came to most of our steering committee meetings. He actually, they were very interested in doing this project until that edict came on down. So it was a shock and surprise to all of us, but we couldn't change their mind.
Have they been in the business of building jails previously?
Oh,
Have they
yeah.
ever? Okay.
They were a major player in the industry. That's why it was so shocking to us.
Yeah, that concerns me. I mean, there was a lot of points that Mr. Edwards and other people felt, so I'm just doing my research. My last question through the chair to Mr. Applebaum would be two You stated that 200 people completed a survey kind of for the public comment or input.
That's an approximation, I'm not sure.
Right, and I can't remember, wasn't it Gilbane that did our convention center too?
No, that was Turner.
Turner, okay.
Yeah, Turner was the successful contractor on the convention center and did a great job. They were also the successful contractor on the convention center hotel.
Can you find out how many surveys that we had that commented on the actual convention center? The public input, I'm sure we have that data somewhere.
Well, no, there was no survey on the site done for the convention center because the convention center site was established before any of us got involved on the project.
Thank you.
I got hired knowing what the site was. We also,
The survey
Yeah.
was for solicitation for this project, so it's information on just what kind of things do you think are important for a site? So should it be close to public transit, this, that? So we have a matrix summary we can forward you just to see.
Yeah, what is another big project that we did?
So we did do the hotel, and we did public comment on that, but it was not necessarily on site. It was more on what's it going to look like, how much do you think we should include? Like, remember, one of the things is they wanted access to a high level. That's why Bar 32 got put up top, is the public access to something, kind of a high
Yeah,
view.
I'm just looking at the numbers. It's nothing.
Oh, you just want to
major.
see how many
because
respondents?
For respondents for a jail, I would think that it would be way more. That would actually
Yeah.
give some community input on a jail that could affect your life or somebody
Right.
else's. So that's what I'm
We
trying to
recently
get
did
at.
Hilliard Road Bridge had a public meeting, and that one, I would say we collected in the 40 to 50 comments on that. That's not as, the community-wide, it's kind of close to, if you live around that area, you might have commented, so that's probably not comparable. The hotel we did it, the public meeting was public, it was in person. That was part of this problem is, we did the survey during COVID, and so it was virtual, but we can look at views too. There was a video that people could view, and so maybe they didn't go through with the full survey, but we can look at counts of views, so at least the messaging got out there, and maybe people didn't feel that they wanted to do the survey, but we can kind of get some of that data, because that was all run through our county website, so our guys can get some information on that, traffic-wise.
I would make this comment, and I think this is important, and I think it's something the county ought to look into doing. Until people know more about the potential site, they may not be that interested. When they know the potential site, they become very interested, especially if they think it impacts them. And then they're very concerned and interested about how it's going to be done, how the design will be, whether it will be properly buffered, everything you could imagine. I think that as we get closer and as we get to the point where there is a preferred site, and that is known, I think that community engagement is essential. I think it's important then to have a community engagement exercise. You obviously can't have it until you know what the site is, because you'd be engaging every neighborhood in Cuyahoga County. But once you know the preferred site, I think it is important to reach out and hear the legitimate concerns and issues to see how they can be addressed in design and other things. So I think it will be important to have a community engagement process, and depending on the neighborhood and where it is, that may inform you as to who might be involved in being the entity to lead that engagement process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Applebaum, for being here this afternoon. I got a question regarding the number of beds. I think you had mentioned you were looking at 1,900 currently,
Yes.
and then you said you could build up to 2,400 beds?
Yeah.
What's the current jail hold as far as the beds? Did you say 1,600?
1,600.
So with all this discussion about, trying to reduce jail population and diversion center and things like that, what's the thinking of going up potentially, 800 beds in a new?
Well, the plan, keep in mind, this is a jail that you want to be there for 35, 40 years. So what we said was that you can't predict that far in the future. And the goal always was from day one, and keep in mind, our jail in, just in recent years was up to 2,300. So the thought process was, let's not build more housing units than we need. Let's try to keep the number down as low as we can, but let's also make sure that you have a central core, that if you had to add housing units later and make the central core robust enough that you could expand up to 2,400. Hopefully we'll never have to do that. But if we had to, you wouldn't want to have a core structure that was so undersized, didn't have, the proper systems, didn't have intake to take care of it. Now, there's much debate about where these numbers are going to end up being. And we also want to have the flexibility that if we build 1,900, and if we find out that we can get the population, let's say, down to 1,300, which would have implied a 1,600 jail, that we are not committed to have all of the operational expense of a larger jail, that you could actually take pods or take areas of this and basically shut them down without the need to staff them and do it in an efficient way. I know the sheriff has some thoughts about jail population, and there's also, we hope that jail population goes down, but there are some legitimate concerns that it could actually go up. Keep in mind that we have misdemeanants who, only because of COVID, well, why don't you explain that?
One other thing. One other thing on the design too is the classification. So we've done a quite in-depth, discussion with Rhonda and her team on what type of classification units we should have. And so again, making sure we build all the right classification units so that you have the mental health units, you have the severe, you have different levels. And so they might not all be full all the time because you're putting them in the right classification instead of mixing people that maybe shouldn't be together. So, again, having the ability that, like Jeff says, you're never going to be totally full because you're putting people in the right spots in the future jails. So that's another piece of where a couple of those added beds go to.
Yeah, I'll give you one example. And there's the chart that you can study. So let's just take the example of youth offenders. You don't want to mix your young offenders with the general population. So there are 2 units, one for male, one for female. 32 beds, I believe. Now, you may have a large population, but you can't put other people, even if there's just one person in the female youth offender, you can't fill the other 7 beds with general population. So you have these categories that you also have to build for. So you could even have less people in the jail, but you still have to build more beds out because of the possibility of needing these different units. But Sheriff, if you want to talk about jail population.
Yeah, Sheriff Island, just in general, because I wasn't prepared. What we're trying to do with the steering committee and with what everything is being discussed with regards to categorization and population has to do with that fine balance between an artificially depressed population number that occurred because of COVID specifically, as well as societal changes with bail reform and things like that, which push numbers, again, artificially low, as well as a prior sheriff's order, which is still in effect under me, which is preventing us from accepting inmates that we should be accepting, which are sentenced misdemeanor inmates. We also have a situation where we have projects in place, which is central booking, as well as the county diversion center, which we're hoping will be able to have an effect on overall population. You balance that against the fact that historically we have had numbers well above 2,200, and the fact that one of the worst things that you can do, not economically, but I think in terms of being humane, is to build a jail and have it full or undersized on the day that it opens, because then we're just creating the same problems that we currently have. So what we're trying to do is balance the fact that we know many of our numbers right now are artificially depressed versus what we historically have always had, and understand also that there is a pressure that I feel from outside that we're currently not accepting inmates that we could or should. And we're trying to come to what we think is a reasonably manageable number. And that's done through weekly meetings with a bunch of stakeholders, including the courts, the prosecutors, the defenders, public defense bar, to make sure that we are managing that population in a way that every single person who we can release from custody is being released, and that we're only maintaining custody over those who must be in custody. That being said, we have pretty consistently over the last 6 months been between 1,550 and 1,650 inmates. We believe as central booking opens up and diversion gets a little bit more up and running, and some of the restrictions I've put in place counterbalance that by bringing a little bit more population in, that those will probably balance out at some point, and that the numbers that we're currently looking at are probably reasonable estimates going into the future. And the only other thing that Mr. Applebaum did not mention is the fact that sometimes it almost doesn't matter what we perceive our numbers are going to be, because the ultimate authority is the Bureau of Adult Detention, and the Ohio Bureau of Adult Detention is not going to give us a permit to build an undersized jail. So they're going to be looking back at our past statistics, at what we have done moving forward and what our plans are. And if we chose to have a 500-bed jail because we didn't think anybody should be in jail, we would not get a permit for the state to do that. They will not let us construct undersized. So that's what,
Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your comments. Maybe you could, either yourself or Mr. Applebaum, now that you brought up the state as not approving a particularly sized jail, what would be like the, in your opinion, the limit, on the low end of a jail that the state would just say? I mean, 500 is quite obvious, but
unfortunately, they won't extend estimates prior to seeing a design and prior to assessing our programming and our numbers that we have had historically.
I see. So they want to see the design and then make a determination based on the design.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Actually, it's interesting because Judge Sheehan in the steering committee meeting asked if we could bring those representatives forward to talk to the steering committee because they want to try to get that answer out of them. And we'll see what
Let's see what happens.
what they
Let me know how that goes. No, okay. Well, I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate the sheriff's comments. It is a balancing act. I mean, I know Councilman Miller and myself and some others have really tried to push for this reduction in bail reform and things like that. On the other hand, you don't want to be caught undersized. That's an excellent point that the sheriff brought up, or reminder, I should say. So I just would ask, moving forward, that continue to look at both options to get what is deemed to be a fair balance moving forward.
I'll make one more comment on that, if I may, Councilman. This is all about the housing units. And basically, for most of the units, you have these housing unit core blocks, basically 48. So think of them as modules. Add 48, subtract 48, except in some specialty units that are smaller. And we're designing the jail in such a way that, obviously on the plus side, if we ever had to add modules, we'll have space and be able to do that, housing units. But as we get into design, if we can make real progress over the next several months, and, before we construct, one option is to maybe, remove a module, make it smaller. But once again, we also want to design the jail. So even if we build it out, even if we build the housing units out, we want to build it in such a way that we anticipate the possibility and hope that someday it's not needed to be used, and then figure out a way, the most efficient way, not to have to man that unit, not to have to, not to create a system that says you have to have people there and it's independent, it can actually be darkened. And that's part of the plan.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Miller.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to Mr. Applebaum, I would also express my gratitude for all the hard work you've done over this very complex process. I have 4 questions and a comment. The first question is, on selecting a site, I understand that that once a site is selected, it would have to be approved by the steering committee and then by the county process, which would take some time. So am I correct that what you would do is start by obtaining some kind of option that would give you the opportunity to buy the chosen site at a selected price for a length of time necessary to complete this process? Is that the general idea of the process?
Ideally, yes. Yes, Councilman.
Second question is that throughout this process, you and the consultant team have been adamant about the advantages, which I see and support, about having the jail on a 1 or 2 floor plan. It's more humane, it's more efficient, it's cost effective, and just better. And yet, I saw recent drawings at one of the meetings that had designs with 3 floors, and my question is whether you remain committed to having the jail on 1 or at most 2 floors, and choosing a site that allows for that.
So I'll comment on that. By the way, when we say 2 floors, what it really refers to is what's called a 2/2. It's 2 floors, but if you took a look at that rendering, on the 1 floor you saw two levels of cells. That's still 1 floor. It's just a 2/2. So the 2 floor plan is one of those blocks on top of another block. So it's 2 floors, but if you actually look at this, each floor has 2, each housing unit has 2 cells. Even on the 1 floor plan, there's always a 48 housing block with 2 layers, 2 levels of cells. What may be proposed here, and this is an ongoing debate, and HOK, by the way, is very strong about this. They feel that even when they say 3 floors, what it actually is, it would be still a 2/2, but it would be having either administrative or other functions, not housing units as a lower level, and then doing the 2/2. HOK, and we have had our staff go out and visit some of these jails that have a slight degree of increased verticality, and maybe 3 levels. The view is that those still are, they still have the core essence of what you've seen. They may be a little bit more efficient, and depending on the site constraints, they may be necessary in order to lay out it properly. But it still can have the same atmosphere and the same feel of what we're talking about. But I think, in all fairness, I think that if we get to that point in the conversation, I would like the design team here. I would like Rhonda here to talk through that with you, and I would like members of the design experts to talk about that. Is there anything else you want to say about that, Nicole?
I mean, the other thing is we've been working really closely with the committee and Rhonda and her staff and looking at weighing options, right? So there's emergency exit plans that they want to look at. There's distance that you have to travel from the core, so how long it takes you to get food out to all the different cells. So all these different factors they're kind of weighing in these matrix as they look at them and saying, okay, that we can take a little, more time to get to the end housing unit if we get this, or yeah, we'd like to stack it up because then we get this advantage. So they're working through all those details, and like Jeff said, I think we'll be ready to come back to you with the design team and Rhonda and her team so that you can understand that what they showed, why they showed what they showed, and what's been accepted by the county side and why they feel that it's worked. And so Jeff did say we went to visit We've seen 2 jails in person recently. Rhonda's obviously been to a couple others herself, but trying to sort of look at how this feels and how far you have to travel to get to the end if it's this far, and how much you're going up steps. Okay, if it's just 2 flights, can our guys make this work, or what makes sense? So we've done a lot of that work, and, elevators is the big problem, that we have in this current jail. So still keeping where you don't need to go on you have them, but you that don't necessarily have to travel on elevators every time you move through the building, as far as the employees go. So just looking at all those different factors, because they all play. And like Jeff said, on the site, at some point, we can only get a site so big that's available, and how does the functions work on the site? So it's all going to be taken into consideration, and we'll be ready to present all that to you when we get there.
Okay, well, thank you. And my advice is don't get a site that's small and constrains your options. My third question is, you mentioned about city-county negotiation. What things have to be negotiated between the city and the county?
That, in my view, simply relates to I don't think it relates so much to the jail. It relates to everything else in the building. Right now, if we build out the Justice Center, putting aside the jail function, much of what is in that Justice Center is city functions, the municipal courts, the city prosecutor, city, things like that. So at a point in time, when we start to really look at the true cost of this, and we look at what's involved here, there's going to have to be a discussion between the city and the county as to what and how the city, whether the city is willing to bear its share of the cost and how that would be done.
Jeff, if I could help the councilman. At the last meeting, I met the council president in Cleveland, and that was the first thing I brought up to him. I said, we really need to get a focus from the mayor and you as to what your intentions are. The information's there, and we know there's going to be a cost attached to it. Are they interested in being part of this? And actually with the courts and the prosecution, that goes more towards the Justice Center. But even with the jail, their input's important. But they're in this committee making major decisions on a property and a building that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to end up them participating. So we've got to get that. I've expressed that to the executive. I've expressed that to the council president. He understood that clearly. He was very clear to me that this is an important project to the city of Cleveland, and that they're going to do everything they can to make sure it stays in the city of Cleveland. And they're going to be a very helpful partner going forward. So I leave that to the executive, the mayor, and the council president. And I will tell you that probably one of the best, if not the best, participants that we've had on the committee has been the administrative judge in Muni Court. She's been there and active and very helpful. So I hope that helps.
Okay, and my next question is about project cost. The current draft involves a significantly larger number of residence units that at one point we thought might possibly be achievable. And my question is whether 500 to 550 million, the range that we've heard talked about, whether you think that's still the likely number, or should we be thinking in terms of a larger number?
So let me first of all comment on the original number. The original number, what it incorporated was, and the reason it was 550 is the original number at about 500 was basically the jail. The additional 50 was, and I don't want to get into the detail too much, but it was sheriff's administration, site acquisition, and a few other things. If the jail, and by the way, these numbers were developed. I want to say a couple things. These were developed before COVID. These were developed before you've seen some of the cost issues which you've all read about. Now, and it was also developed before we increased the probable size of the housing units. Now, having said that, I would have been, without those two things, I would have been very comfortable with that number, and I still believe that it is possible to get within, it may be possible to get within that number. I mean, that's one of the reasons we want to bring the design builder on. We want to get these initial estimates. Quite honestly, some of what we're talking about when we revised the program, we took a lot of inefficiencies out of the original program. For example, there were space that was both in Sheriff's Administration and in the jail that we can combine. So we've taken things out. We're not changing right now for, rough order of magnitude purposes that around that 550 number. Could it grow? Yes. Could it possibly stay the same? Possibly. A lot depends on the site and how much it costs to remediate the site. So I mean, that's about as much as I can tell you right now. We need to get the design builder on board. We need to get some better and more estimating done. We just did confirm this program. We need to know more about the site.
Plus,
That's the non-answer I'm going to give you.
okay, and plus we have the 4 interest rate increases to worry about as well.
Ew.
So, Mr. Chairman, my last thing, just a comment, is that there are 2 broad problems as a result of which we currently do not have a good feel for what is achievable in terms of jail population. The first one being that major elements like central booking and bail reform have not been implemented yet, and we don't know how much they're going to be able to do to help us. And the second reason being the impact of COVID-19 on court operations, resulting in the fact that the sheriff is telling us that we're not admitting people that under normal conditions we might be pretty much required to admit. And my comment is that I would be very uncomfortable moving forward until we have a good handle on this. I think we'd be better off to wait a little while, knowing how urgent it is to get a new jail, but we'd be better off to wait a little while than to swag. And so that's just my thought for what it's worth.
Thank you. Anything further? Jeff, yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay, and a lot of the questions been answered already, but I do have just a couple, and I'm more concerned about the location. So the bids that you put out that's due February 7th, is that what I heard? Yes. Okay, so we did that because the other 4 sites have issues that we hope to find something better. Is that kind of, otherwise we wouldn't have gone out looking for more.
I think, more accurately stated, we did it, we had talked about doing this earlier. This was always something we talked about. And we wanted to make sure that there wasn't something that might be out there. We're always looking for something better. I would be shocked if we found a site that was perfect. And I suspect that if we do get proposals that come in on February 7, they're going to have issues and problems as well. I think this is a very difficult process, because if there was a really good site sitting out there, someone would have done something with it, or there will be issues with the site.
Is the February 7th, I'm not familiar with how this works. Do you see them starting to come in, or is February 7th when everyone jumps on?
They're due on February 7th, so typically we don't see people send them in ahead of time, maybe a
No?
day ahead of time or so.
Really? Okay.
I did get a phone call from someone this week just saying they were trying to get into the portal to figure out how it works, so I sent them down to purchasing for that help. So, I mean, we've heard a little bit, but we haven't heard a ton of talk. We didn't get a lot of participation in the pre-bid meeting for it. But I would say the other piece that we wanted to look at is if for some reason there's a developer out there that could gather sites together. You know, we looked at some big swaths of land that didn't have 50 different owners. But if somebody else is out there that's been working to assemble sites maybe, and they have control of most of it and only need to get a few more, maybe they could propose something to us that we didn't see in our search or we thought would be problematic in our search in order to try to get ownership of. Because again, if we had to go negotiate with, 100 different owners, that was going to be difficult if we had a handful that held out on us. So the idea was kind of to put it out there and say, does anyone have a site of this size, or are you working to assemble it, or could you work to assemble it? We did put this out for longer than normal as well. It was out for more than a couple months to try to gain some more interest. So it's kind of twofold. Is there anything else out there that is quote unquote better, or just things that maybe we didn't see when we did our sweep that have now become available, or somebody has the ability to put together.
So if I may ask, so given we've been spending a great deal of time on this search, it hasn't been just a few weeks, been months looking, and now we put it out to a broader, hopefully, and let's say that does not come to fruition either. What's your plan B? What is it that, what do you hope to do in order to, you thinking of moving out farther?
The sites we have are still in play.
Yeah, Mike Dever once again with Public Works. So I'm actually coming before committee, hopefully an executive session at your next council meeting, to give you an update of where we are.
Okay.
We are still working through the due diligence period with these shortlisted sites, and right now I think things are going fairly well there. The hope is that we get additional information when this RFP closes. So I'll give you an update on Tuesday evening, and we'll continue the discussion. Obviously, we're moving forward in regards to trying to get the design builder on board, and that'll be before you probably within the next month to 6 weeks or so. So these pieces are all moving here, and we're trying to make some decisions that are best for the county.
Okay, that's good to know. Didn't know we were going to get that update, so I appreciate it. One other question, if I may. If we had a site that we all agreed upon and we're ready to move forward, do you think that we would get perhaps a better bid proposal from more than just one? Do you think that part of the problem here is that we are not giving a complete package of what it is that, where it can be built and how much acreage there is, and, 2 stories, the maximum, because we have enough acreage, or is going to go 3? Do you think that the uncertainty of not knowing where this is going to be deters those from wanting to spend the time to submit a bid?
I don't think that has any impact. The builder, they always understand on most projects. They're selected often before a site is selected. They know they're actually part of the due diligence project. Frankly, they will not have an issue no matter what we select. It's going to affect the project budget, but it's not going to affect them. Their willingness to do the project, the fee that they will earn, what they get for the staff, that would not have any impact on their willingness to propose one way or the other.
So, if I may, so the uncertainty of that piece of maybe the county's going to even change their mind. Maybe we're not going to build one, or maybe, as Councilman Miller, we're going to stall for a while until we figure out some of the inmate population or diversion center outcomes, or there's that uncertainty of location and uncertainty of even building at this time, that doesn't play into?
It could have a negative impact in the sense that once we select somebody, they are holding, they have made the commitment to keep that staff there and ready to go. If we lock up their staff, and then say we're delaying the project, you've got to do one of two things. You either have to release them, or you're gonna end up having to pay for that impact. So, the only comment I do want to, I understand everything that Councilman Miller is saying, and I appreciate that. I will also say, though, that the costs that we are seeing are just going to keep going up. And the longer we wait, the more expensive it's going to be and the more difficult it's going to be. I would.
Jeff, I think we get it.
Yeah, we
Okay.
got it. And
You know, we're just digging holes here, as far as I'm concerned. To help out as far as the new jail, Indianapolis just built theirs. If you look at the demographics of Marion County, the city of Indianapolis, you're talking about Cuyahoga County and Cleveland. They built their brand-new jail. They had two facilities that they morphed into one. It has 2,200 prisoners to date, built for 3,000. And all of the things that we're discussing are things that they discussed. The thing that I think the council as a whole and the committee definitely has to understand is that we're dealing, Cuyahoga County always loves to say we're different. We're not. We're no different from anybody. We have the same problems and the same pluses as everybody. What the reality is we're behind the 8 ball as far as building this jail. We're 15 to 20 years late on building a jail. We have ADA compliant problems with the courthouse, the Justice Center, and the jails. To bring them up to usability, not making anything better other than accessible, is $250 million. Now that lawsuit's ready to go in federal court. I personally can't sit here and say I've got time, or I'm going to kick the can down the line. And the committee has been made, the Justice Center Committee is privy to that. They understand that the reality is we had time 15 years ago. And we're dealing with what we're dealing with, and we probably 10 years ago should have dealt with this. But it's a heavy lift, and nobody wanted to lift it. So in a way, we're all guilty of kind of waiting a little bit. The people we've hired to be our experts, quite honestly, are experts. In public office, I've always relied on, if there's a police question, I relied on a police chief. If there's a fire question, I rely on the fire chief, or I don't have any faith in them. I have to have faith in them. We are late to the party on booking. We are late to the party on diversion. We are late to the party on 24/7 booking, which is the key, which will help a little bit. And the calculus is available to show you what we're going to save in the hearings that we've already had. And you'll be getting that. It's reams of information that you'll have to go through. And for that, I apologize. But it's there, which these are all good questions. But as far as time, we don't have it. As far as the concern about how we're going to pay for it, very valid, and it should be dealt with. And we're waiting on that. We've hired experts that can come in here and tell you exactly what you've asked. We've gone through. So it's a little bit unfair to you because we've heard all of this before. Now, as far as size of the jail, that's something that the committee has struggled with. But ultimately, in the end, especially with everything involved with this council is going to decide. So I get a little distracted when I hear people say, without backing, that we have time. We do not.
Mr. Chairman.
And we don't want to make mistakes, and we want to follow the process. And I think we're following it pretty rigidly as far as moving this forward. Some things have gotten out publicly that shouldn't have gotten out, that made, quite honestly, us all look pretty bad. That was unnecessary and upset people, which was unnecessary. And I had that conversation with the council president and the council people that are in those wards in Cleveland. And they're fine now. we're okay with that now. But we've got to be very careful in how we start moving forward. And I'm not saying these aren't good questions. These are valid questions. But the ADA thing, that is a guillotine over our heads right now, a guillotine. Unless you can find $250 million to improve buildings that should have been replaced 20 years ago.
I appreciate that, Chair, and if I may, Councilman, I get that, and I honestly, I'm not as close to it as you are, so my questions might be
Right.
repetitive, and I'm
Very valid.
I apologize for that. But we also have been investing quite a bit in the existing jail, and even though we're aside from the ADA, there's still millions of dollars that we've invested because we have to, whether it's the kitchen or whether it's elevators or whether it's whatever. I mean, you know what the list
Right,
is.
right.
So
And
as time goes on, we are continuing putting more money in that. But that's why I was asking if
Yeah.
this, right, where we're
I
at.
agree. We're investing millions of dollars in a facility we know
Right.
eventually going to come down because it's got to. And those are wasted dollars, but we have to do it. We have to make it safe because those people are in our care and custody. Mr. Miller.
Thank you. I would just like to remind the chair that I was the person that brought up about the interest rate cycle that we're expecting from the Federal Reserve Bank, and that has very significant costs involved. So I'm telling you that I'm aware that there's time constraints and that we're gonna have to make some difficult decisions about what to do and when to do it, and the discomfort that I expressed before, that discomfort is still there, but there's other factors that are going to have to be considered, and I'm aware of that. Thank you.
Right. Also, we've dealt with, which you may not be aware of, that Amazon basically has the market cornered on steel. So we're going to have to be dealing with that hurdle, which is a major hurdle. But we've got, I think, the right people in place to deal with this. And I'm willing, and I'm pretty sure the committee is willing to allow that process to take place, listening to our experts. And then that package is going to be delivered here for your determinations individually. Is it the right thing to do to move forward? And that's always been the case. Anything else? And Jeff, if you would start accumulating all of your back presentations at the Justice Center Committee, do we have that?
They are actually on our website, so we can send them to you, and if you want us to print and get you binders.
Could
of
we
some
get a
sort-
hard
Yep.
copy, and could you bind that for the committee? Because I got a feeling we're going to be referring back and forth to individual pages, because these questions are good, but the answers should be in there.
Yeah, we can do that. And the good thing is, if you have constituents or somebody who is interested, it is all on our website, so we'll get you that link to just to have, but
If we
we'll get
get
you a book. Yep,
hardbound that we can add to as we move along.
yep.
It's just not one
Yeah.
Right.
4 or 5.
I'm
That's
going to
why I
consult
said
Lenora.
it's-
She gets those real big binders.
Like I said, I think one of the reasons nobody really addressed this is because the lift is heavy. And it hasn't been easy. It really hasn't. But all these questions are good questions. And the answers, if they're not in there, then we'll definitely address them. Okay? Anything else? Thank you. We do have enough, Janine, the council president's here.
Yes, you do have a quorum now.
Yeah, if I could, in the packets that you received, the minutes of the January 18th meeting are there. I'll accept a motion in a second.
So moved.
And any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Against? Thank you. Miscellaneous business. And we will have, after the January 10th meeting, we'll bring Jeff and whomever you might think necessary back to answer any questions. Please accumulate your questions as we go so we can be prepared to really get into it, because we're really at that time. We'll be doing that. Thank you.
Was it recognized I was here?
Yeah, I did. Yes, ma'am.